This memory took place in the early spring of 1944 in my hometown in Brantford, Connecticut. I was 7 years old, and the United States was engaged in the Second World War. One afternoon, while standing with my grandmother at the cashier counter in the A&P store, waiting our turn to be checked out, I spotted a magazine cover showing a corpsman tending to a fallen combat soldier who had been wounded in action. I asked my grandmother, "How do we know there's really a war going on? I mean, we see the war in the movies and in the pictures and magazines, but we never see the war. Maybe they're just making it up." She said, "I think you're right, Jerry. Maybe there just isn't a war. Maybe they're just making it up." I asked, but why? She said, "I don't know the answer to that question." A woman ahead of us in the line smiled at me, but it was more than a smile. She was beautiful. With her blonde hair and blue eyes, she was giving me a gift. I'm now sure she must have been thinking, what a cute kid to have such a thought. My heart almost exploded. I was in love. It seemed as though the only thing people were thinking about was the war. I helped Ding carry groceries home from the A&P one day, and she pointed to the flags with stars on them that were hung on some of the front doors. She said each blue star indicated that a mother's son who lived in the house had gone off to war. A gold star told the observer that a mother's son had been killed in the war. Our neighbors, the Bedians, had hung a blue star on their front door. Their son, Red, a teenager everyone in the neighborhood loved, had joined the U.S. Navy. That night I prayed that Red would come home safely. One day while climbing the stone wall behind the house overlooking the cemetery, I saw a large gathering of people who seemed to be dressed for church, as well as about a dozen soldiers carrying rifles. In the past, I had watched funerals from behind the hedge at the edge of the graveyard, but I had only seen a military funeral in the movies. I climbed a tree to get a better look. A frail woman wearing a long black hooded coat seemed to be getting the most attention. She was bent over against the wind as she and a man walked from the limousine to the gravesite. When they halted next to the casket, she leaned into him for support. The men removed their hats and all heads were bowed as a preacher said a prayer. I've forgotten most of the ceremony, but I do remember the soldiers firing their rifles and then the soulful sound of the bugler playing taps. An officer presented the fragile woman triangular folded stars of stripes. As a gust of wind blasted across the graveyard, her hood blew off, revealing the face of a young, grieving woman who seemed to be a beautiful woman at the A&P. I wasn't sure it was her, but I knew the war had taken the woman's husband, or maybe her brother. After the funeral, as I picked up empty bullet castings from the grass, it was now clear to me what it meant to be a war, and I was certain I hated the Japanese and the Germans.